Hello everyone, it's Dr. Fox, and let's talk about the common carotid artery and its branches. In this video, we'll discuss the pathway of the common carotid artery and its two terminal branches, the internal and external carotid arteries. We'll describe their pathways, major branches, and regions served. Finally, we'll diagram the major blood supply to the brain. So the common carotid artery, as you know, on the right side originates from the brachiocephalic trunk, and on the left side originates from the arch of the aorta. It ascends the neck within the carotid sheath, and it's accompanied by the internal jugular vein and vagus nerve within that sheath. The terminal branches of the common carotid artery are the internal carotid artery and the external carotid artery. The external carotid artery is more anteriorly oriented, and it's going to supply regions of the superior neck, face, and scalp, whereas the internal carotid artery is more posteriorly oriented, and it's going to continue ascending superiorly, entering the carotid canal of the cranium before entering into the cranial cavity. It's going to supply the cranial cavity and brain, as well as the orbit and regions of the forehead. So let's take a look at the external carotid artery. Here we can see the common carotid. We can see it bifurcating into the external, and then there's the internal that is a little more posterior there. So there are many different branches of the external carotid artery. We won't get into all of them. Suffice it to say, there are branches that serve the neck, face, head, etc. There are a few individual branches that I'd like to highlight for you. The first being the facial artery. The facial artery we can see very well coming up over the mandible here, and as its name suggests, it is going to supply large portions of the face, including the muscles of facial expression, with blood. Then, as we ascend the external carotid artery, we'll come to the two terminal branches. That's why we have these asterisks here of the external carotid artery. And these are the maxillary artery and the superficial temporal artery. The maxillary artery is going to supply the deep face with blood. So it is going to take a deep dive behind the ramus of the mandible here, and we find it within the infratemporal fossa, and it is supplying the muscles of mastication as well as regions peripheral to the infratemporal fossa with blood. So the maxillary artery serves deep face. The superficial temporal artery will continue up onto the lateral skull, supplying the external cranium, i.e. the scalp, with blood. Now let's take a look at that internal carotid artery. The internal carotid artery passes through the carotid canal of the cranium. It has several branches. So anterior is over here, posterior over here. It has a branch called the ophthalmic, which is supplying the orbit as well as the forehead with blood. And then all of the remaining branches are going to be one of the major sources of blood to the brain, as we'll see. So let's take a look at the cerebral arterial circle, sometimes called the circle of Willis. This illustration is an inferior view of this circle. And what I want to do is break this up like so. And so this horizontal line that I've drawn is going to delimit the portions served by the internal carotid artery. So that's everything anterior or rostral from that, versus everything posterior is going to be supplied by the vertebral arteries. So the vertebral arteries are ascending the neck through the transverse foramina of cervical vertebrae C6 through C1, and then they're going to enter through foramen magnum, and they come together here. And they're sending off various branches, but this is the posterior supply of blood. Now, a complete arterial circle of Willis is quite rare. It's only found in about 1 of every 5 individuals, or 25%. And its completeness depends on the presence of these communicating arteries. So there's an anterior one that's going to serve left and right, and then there are 2 posterior possibilities here. And these communicating arteries are what would complete this circle. Now, having these communicating arteries in place is very helpful because it represents collateral blood flow left, right, and front and back, or anterior and posterior. So let us assess this knowledge that we've newly found. Which areas external to the cranial cavity are served by the internal carotid artery? Deep face? No, that's the maxillary artery. External cranium and scalp? No, that's superficial temporal. Face? Nope, that's the facial artery. Orbit and forehead? Yes, the ophthalmic artery is going to be the blood supply to the orbit, and branches of that will make it out into the forehead. So D is the correct answer. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to talking to you in the next video. Take care, all.